Hi, my name's Ryan Kennedy, and I'm a chef for Brigade. Today we're going to talk about roasting vegetables. So obviously in front of me there's a whole massive smorgasbord of different types of vegetables, and each one of these vegetables kind of has a different approach when it comes to roasting them. When you roast a vegetable, why would you even do that in the first place? It's because you're trying to impact really like two things. One, you're trying to really change the texture, like the finished texture from the raw product to what's roasted. It's definitely a little bit different than just like a steamed vegetable. And the other part of it is we're trying to change the flavor. When you roast something, you get a caramelization on that, and that really changes the flavor. Or things that are like really starchy, like carrots or like potatoes, some of those starches change in flavor as well through the cooking process. So really what we're trying to do when we're roasting is we're pulling moisture out, we're caramelizing, and we're making things, in some cases crispy, or in the case of potatoes, fluffy. So if that's what we want, if that's our end goal, then our approach to how we cook them is going to be different. Broccoli has a different moisture content and a different sort of structural integrity to a potato. Carrots are certainly different than kale. I want my kale to be crispy. I want these, carrots to be creamy. That approach might end up actually looking very similar. So I think it's important to think about what's my vegetable, what's my end product, and then kind of work backwards from there when it comes to how you approach cooking them. All right, so now that we're going to get into the roasting of the vegetables, the thing that I really love about it is just the simplicity of it. All of these preparations here, broccoli, potatoes, Brussels sprouts, carrots, kale, even the zucchini, oil and salt. That's all we're getting into. And we're only seasoning with enough salt to kind of bring out that natural, delicious flavor of whatever those vegetables are. And our goal is just to coat all of the vegetables with enough oil so that we can kind of enhance the caramelization process, and season with just enough salt to kind of enhance that flavor. If we can nail the cook on all of these things, when they come out, we're getting that like slightly crispy texture, we're getting that perfect interior depending on the vegetable that changes a little bit, and then we're getting just enough salt to really taste it, to taste the natural, flavor, sweetness, depth of that vegetable. So I have 4 quarts of zucchini here. I'm just going to pour this into this bowl. I have a half cup of oil right here. Obviously that could change, how much you need depending on how much surface area you're dealing with some of these different vegetables. And then we have 5 grams of salt, just a nice little starting point. All right, so I'm just coating the zucchini in the oil and just trying to move around the salt that I've added in here to make sure that we don't get any pockets of salt that are really, really, clustered, and that I'm evenly distributing that salt and evenly distributing that oil. We want to make sure that every piece of zucchini in here is covered with oil, because it's really going to aid in the caramelization process. Otherwise, we're just going to dehydrate that portion of the zucchini. All right, so now that we have our zucchini tossed with oil, the salt's evenly distributed, we're going to put it onto the pan. And there's a couple of things to think about when we're doing this, when we're popping it onto the pan. And really, the biggest one is just a thin layer. We just really want a thin layer of zucchini. We don't want it piled up on top. If we have just like slightly too much, grab another pan. The big reason for that is because we're trying to make sure that every vegetable that's on here, every piece of zucchini is going to get exposed to dry heat. That's going to help with that caramelization process. Otherwise, if they're touching each other or like piled on top of each other, really the piling on top is what's going to create just steam. And if we wanted to steam them, we would just throw them into the steamer. We wouldn't need to cover them with oil. So we just want to make sure that we don't have too much crowding in the pan. And so a thin layer about anything. Most of these are going to shrink as well. I mean, obviously the ones that are covered or that have a higher moisture content, as they cook, they're going to shrink a little bit. And then whatever is touching now will not be touching in a short bit of time. But you don't want to rely on that when it comes to like piling on. So you're just trying to make sure, without being too neurotic, that you have a nice thin layer that once it goes into the oven, every single piece that's on here is going to be exposed to dry heat. All right, now that our vegetables are all seasoned, they're coated with oil, they're laid out on sheet trays, we're ready to talk about cooking. So our approach to cooking for each one of these vegetables is going to be slightly different, again, because they have different inherent qualities to them, and we're trying to get sort of a very specific result for each one of those. So these 4 here, zucchini, broccoli, potatoes, Brussels sprouts, we're going to cook these at a slightly higher temperature. We're going to go to 350 degrees, and we're going to have a high fan. The reason for that is because we either are trying to like really push caramelization, or we want them to sort of be crispy a little bit. So we're going to go 350 degrees with a high fan. Still being that that's our approach, these are all going to take different times. And that's a lot of feel. That's a lot of like looking into the oven and seeing where things are at. I really like broccoli when, it's certainly tender on the inside, but some of these little pieces on the top get really frizzled and crispy, really delicious to me. For a potato, I want that outer exterior to be kind of like puffed, crispy, golden, inside, really fluffy, really nice and starchy. Brussels sprouts, kind of similar to the broccoli, tender on the inside, crispy leaves on the outside. And we're not going to really get too much crisp out of the zucchini, but there's so much natural sugar in here that like the caramelization process will be really delicious, and we can't do that at a low temperature. We still have the carrots and the kale to talk about, and when we're approaching these two vegetables, even though they couldn't be like any more different from their texture, their appearance, even what our finished product is, we're going to approach them in terms of the oven and the roast, kind of exactly the same way. So we cooked all these vegetables at 350 degrees with a high fan. These two are going to go into the oven at 300 degrees with a low fan. And the reason for that is because we just want even cooking. We're just trying to distribute that dry heat across both of these vegetables in a super even way, but for very different reasons. We kept the carrots whole. The reason that we're doing that is because we want to slowly and evenly draw out the moisture, concentrate the carrot flavor, and soften these vegetables. The vegetables, have a lot of natural sugar in them, these carrots, and so if we did a more aggressive temperature, we might brown the outside before we fully soften the inside, and we just want that really even cook. And when I cut into this, I really want it to taste like, the essence of carrot. I want that sort of to be elevated, and the only way to do that is to sort of soften them, create a perfect texture, draw out the moisture. When it comes to the kale, I'm trying to make a kale chip that when I bite into it, it shatters. It just kind of like explodes when you bite into it. And the only way to do that is to make sure that you get an even cook. So we're going to do 300 degrees with a low fan. This is kind of piled high now, or piled a little bit higher than the rest of these vegetables. But because there's so much moisture in the kale, it's going to shrink pretty dramatically, pretty quickly. Also, if you put the kale chips in there with a high fan, by the time the moisture has left them, they become really light and they're just going to blow all over the place. So 300 degrees with a low fan. These are going to take the carrots maybe somewhere between an hour or 2 hours. And again, I'm just going to be like checking them, but I have a little bit of wiggle room because our temperature's so low. The kale is going to take probably 10 to 15 minutes, and we're going to maneuver that around a little bit. Obviously, significantly less time, even though the cook temp is the same. All right, all of our vegetables are roasted now, and you can see lots of different textures, colors, crispiness, really nice and tender whole roasted carrots. We had a very simple approach, 350 degrees with a high fan or 300 degrees with a low fan. All of these took different times, but we really got the texture that we were looking for. Broccoli, just like I described, tender on the inside, crispy on the outside. Nice crispy potatoes with a nice soft interior. Brussels sprouts with that crispy outer shell, nice caramelization, nicely caramelized zucchini, really tender, beautiful whole roasted carrots, and then super crispy kale that shatters when you bite into it. Our approach was super, super simple. I really hope that when it comes to roasting vegetables for you in the future, that these tips, techniques, all of that will be really helpful.